In 1848, a carpenter found a shiny rock in California, and within months, 300,000 desperate men were tearing the land apart. This wasn't just the gold rush. It was an environmental disaster, a racial war, and the birth of modern California. Why did 90% of miners die broke? How did a single discovery lead to genocide? And who really got rich? This is the true cost of America's gold fever. Gold and ghosts, the fever that forged California. It began with a glint in the river at Sutter's mill in 1848, and by the time the dust settled, the world had shifted. Word of gold spread like wildfire, drawing nearly 300,000 souls, dreamers, drifters, and desperados, from across oceans and deserts, all chasing the promise of fortune. They came by wagon, by ship, some with nothing but hope and a pan, others with everything to lose. California, raw and untamed, became a crucible of ambition. San Francisco erupted from a sleepy village into a roaring boomtown, and a new state was born almost overnight. But beneath the gleam, darkness churned. Native American communities were devastated by disease, starvation, and violence as their lands were stripped away and their lives destroyed. Rivers were churned, mountains scarred, and the gold that glittered in so many eyes left behind more ghosts than riches. It was a time of myth and madness, where fortunes vanished faster than they were made, and the true price of gold was measured in blood, broken dreams, and the reshaping of a nation. Whispers before the storm. California's forgotten gold. Long before Sutter's mill ignited the frenzy, gold shimmered quietly beneath California's soil, waiting. In 1842, as he reached down to gather wild onions in the sleepy canyons north of Los Angeles, Francisco Lopez unearthed not just a bulb, but a future no one could yet imagine. Golden flakes clung to the roots like whispers from the earth itself. Though confirmed and even sent to the U.S. Mint, the discovery stirred no stampede, only a flicker of curiosity. Mexican miners worked the silent streams, and friars instructed native laborers to bury their secrets deep, fearing the chaos gold might bring. These were the first tremors before the quake, the overlooked beginnings of a fever that would soon explode, reshaping California forever. The gold was always there, waiting to be noticed, waiting to rewrite history. Gold in the water, ruin on the land. It began with a glint in the water, a whisper between trees, and a secret too powerful to keep. On a crisp January morning in 1848, James Marshall stood over the icy current of the American River and saw gold glittering in the tail race of Sutter's mill. A discovery meant to be buried under silence soon thundered across the nation. Sutter, a man dreaming of wheat fields and empire, saw his future unravel as word leaked out, first in whispers, then in shouts. Samuel Brannan paraded through San Francisco, a vial of gold in hand, crying out the news that would hollow the town overnight and then rebirth it in chaos and fortune. Ships lay abandoned in harbors, businesses shuttered, and men poured into the hills chasing dreams spun from dust. In their wake, Sutter's land was ravaged, his laborers vanished, and his dreams turned to ash. California, still new to the American flag, was about to become something no treaty could have predicted, a fevered land of greed, grit, and gold. Crossing hell for a glint of gold. They came from every corner of the earth, chasing a promise written in glitter and dreams, but there was nothing easy about reaching California. The journey itself was a gauntlet. Some sailed around the Horn of South America, enduring months of storm, starvation, and scurvy. Others braved jungles and fevers across Panama or Nicaragua, dragging themselves from coast to coast only to find more hardship waiting. The overland trails tore families apart and scattered bones across the wilderness. Steamships groaned with human cargo, men packed like crates, gambling away what little they had as wealthier passengers watched from cushioned cabins, their privilege on open display. Food was barrel-packed and hope was rationed. When they finally arrived, San Francisco was a chaos of abandoned ships and makeshift dreams, vessels turned into jails and taverns, timber and canvas making up a city that had grown too fast. Every breath, every gamble, every step westward was a wager against death, all for a handful of gold that, more often than not, slipped through trembling fingers like sand. Gold, blood, and vanishing towns. As the rivers of Central California ran dry of easy gold, fortune hunters surged north, carving restless paths into the rugged hills of Siskiyou and Trinity, where towns like Portuguese Flat rose and vanished in a blink. In their wake came not just gold dust, but a storm of violence and greed. Chinese miners built temples and Latin American laborers swung pickaxes beside Americans, but they soon found themselves targets, taxed, driven out, or attacked outright, by those who saw the dwindling gold as a prize meant only for themselves. The newly born California legislature made that clear with a punishing foreign miners' tax. Native tribes, already displaced and starving, tried to resist, but bullets spoke louder than arrows. Entire villages disappeared, not just from maps, but from memory. Even today, in the shadows of half-crumbled buildings and forgotten grave markers, the echoes of the gold rush whisper of something far more complex than riches, of broken promises, buried lives, and the heavy cost of one of history's most fevered pursuits. Gold fever goes global, the rise of the 49ers. The California gold rush exploded from a whisper to a global shout in just over a year. It began with locals, Californios, native Californians, and settlers already in the region, scraping gold from riverbeds with their families. But as word leaked out, a tidal wave of humanity followed. First came the Oregonians, then Hawaiians, Mexicans, Chileans, and Peruvians. By 1849, the world had caught gold fever. Tens of thousands of Americans journeyed overland by wagon or took perilous sea routes, some circling Cape Horn, others hacking through Panama's jungles, to reach the El Dorado of the American West. These were the 49ers, named for the year they arrived in droves. From Asia, hundreds of Chinese miners, calling California Gum San, the Gold Mountain, entered the fray, often met with fierce racism and violence. Europeans, reeling from political turmoil back home, came too. French, Italians, Germans, and Britons joined the crush. Even small villages in Genoa sent settlers who would help shape California's agricultural backbone. Amid this rush, women were scarce. Only 700 of the 40,000 who landed by ship in 1849 were female, but essential. Some joined their husbands, others came alone, seeking fortune and freedom. Many ran boarding houses or laundries, earning steadier incomes than the miners themselves. But tragedy followed the trail too. Cholera, accidents, mining disputes, and disease created thousands of widows before dreams were ever realized. Amid the chaos, faith found foothold. Methodist preacher William Taylor arrived in San Francisco in 1849, delivering sermons in the streets to booming crowds. He built California's first Methodist church and hospital with donations from miners, proof that even in the midst of gold madness, communities could rise from the dust. Law and disorder in the gold fields, rights, claims, and chaos. In the early days of the California gold rush, law was more myth than reality. When James Marshall discovered gold at Sutter's mill in January 1848, California was a political limbo, technically Mexican territory, but under U.S. military occupation following the Mexican-American War. Though the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo transferred California to the U.S. in February 1848, the region wouldn't officially become a state until September 1850. For over 2 years, the goldfields operated in a wild vacuum, with no civil government, no official courts, and no established property laws. This legal void became an accidental blessing for early miners. With no taxes, no permits, and no regulation, gold was literally free for the taking. Everything operated on an informal honor code mixed with brute force. Miners borrowed heavily from pre-existing Mexican mining laws, particularly the idea of the claim. If you arrived first and worked the land, the gold was yours. But once you abandoned it, someone else could seize the spot. This gave rise to the infamous practice of claim jumping, sparking violent feuds and vigilante justice. With no official property rights, every man, and occasionally woman, had to defend their find, often with a pickaxe in one hand and a pistol in the other. Miners sometimes formed impromptu courts to settle disputes, but fairness varied wildly. These chaotic settlements often devolved into ethnic strife, with white miners aggressively pushing out foreign prospectors, including Latin Americans, Chinese, and others. While U.S. law nominally promised to uphold Mexican land grants, most of the goldfields fell outside those boundaries, leaving federal promises moot. In the meantime, the unique absence of rules helped attract a range of settlers, including free African Americans and escaped slaves, drawn by California's lax enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. In this raw frontier of opportunity and violence, California's goldfields became a crucible of American ambition, where fortune and freedom clashed daily with disorder and lawlessness. Unearthing wealth, the evolution of gold recovery techniques in California. The story of gold in California begins long before the 49ers arrived, with geological events dating back hundreds of millions of years. Underwater volcanic activity deposited mineral-rich lava, laden with gold, on the ocean floor. Tectonic forces later thrust this treasure to the surface in the form of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Over millennia, erosion exposed the gold, which was washed into riverbeds, where it settled in gravel bars and alluvial deposits, ready for discovery. When gold fever hit in 1848, the first miners focused on these easy pickings. They scooped up gold flakes and nuggets using simple tools, or just their bare hands. The iconic image of gold panning, a solitary figure crouched beside a stream, belongs to this earliest stage. But panning was slow and inefficient, and miners quickly innovated. From cradles to rivers, miners graduated to tools like the rocker and long tom, which could process more gravel and separate gold more effectively. Others dug shafts up to 40 feet deep into riverbanks, an approach known as coyoting. The most ambitious efforts involved rerouting entire rivers, drying out beds to expose hidden gold beneath. Within just 5 years, as much as 12 million ounces of gold were extracted, an astonishing feat, especially with such rudimentary tools. Blasting the hills, hydraulic mining. In 1853, the game changed with the advent of hydraulic mining, a revolutionary but highly destructive technique. High-pressure water cannons blasted hillsides, tearing loose gold-bearing gravel, which was then filtered through sluices. By the mid-1880s, hydraulic mining had recovered another 11 million ounces of gold. But this method came with a heavy price. Mountains were leveled, rivers clogged with silt and debris, and ecosystems were destroyed. In response, court rulings in the 1880s and federal legislation in 1893 restricted hydraulic mining, but the environmental scars remain visible to this day. Into the valleys, dredging and hard rock mining. After surface and hillside gold became scarce, miners turned to the riverbeds of the Central Valley. By the late 1890s, dredging technology allowed recovery of gold that had accumulated over time in lowlands. These floating mechanical giants scooped up vast amounts of earth, yielding an additional 20 million ounces of gold. Simultaneously, miners pursued gold trapped inside quartz veins, hard rock mining. This labor-intensive method involved blasting and tunneling deep into the earth, then crushing the rock to extract gold. Often, mercury was used to amalgamate the gold, efficient, but dangerously toxic. Mercury contamination remains a legacy of this practice. The Golden Legacy. In total, California yielded an estimated 118 million troy ounces, 3,700 metric tons, of gold from the gold rush through the modern era. This extraordinary bounty transformed not just the state, but the trajectory of American history, fueling migration, technological innovation, and economic growth. Yet the story is not just one of wealth, it is also one of exploitation, environmental degradation, and deep cultural change. The techniques may have evolved, but the rush for gold left a lasting imprint on the landscape and the people who sought their fortunes in California's hills and rivers. Gold rush prophets. Who really struck it rich? While images of dirt-covered miners unearthing gold nuggets dominate the mythology of the California gold rush, the true financial winners were often far from the goldfields. Recent historical analysis reveals a clear truth. Merchants and entrepreneurs, not miners, reaped the biggest rewards. Merchants, the real millionaires of the gold rush. The quintessential example is Samuel Brannan, perhaps the most financially successful man in early gold rush California. A savvy businessman, Brannan capitalized on the frenzy not by mining gold himself, but by selling the tools of the trade. He bought up every pickaxe, shovel, and pan he could find in San Francisco and sold them in the goldfields at sky-high prices. His early investments in supply stores in Sacramento, Coloma, and other strategic locations made him a millionaire in a matter of months. Similarly, Levi Strauss arrived in San Francisco in 1853 and started selling durable denim overalls. His success in outfitting miners laid the foundation for the iconic Levi's brand that thrives to this day. Miners, high risk, modest return. While a lucky few miners did strike it rich, the odds were not in their favor. About half of all gold seekers barely broke even after subtracting the high cost of supplies, travel, and living expenses. Economic studies suggest that white miners generally fared better than Black, Native American, Chinese, and Latino miners, many of whom faced discrimination, violence, and unjust taxes. The foreign miners' tax of 1851, for example, disproportionately targeted Latino miners, cutting deeply into their profits and further entrenching racial disparities in gold rush earnings. The role of women and everyday entrepreneurs. In a male-dominated frontier society, women entrepreneurs found a profitable niche. Boarding houses, home-cooked meals, laundry services, and sewing were in high demand, and women could charge premium prices. Some even operated successful brothels, saloons, and gambling halls, combining hospitality and entertainment into lucrative businesses. Boom to business, the mid-1850s shift. By 1855, the gold rush was evolving. Easy-to-find surface gold had been largely extracted, and mining became the domain of companies that could afford teams of workers and large-scale operations. Solo prospecting was no longer viable. But California's economy had matured. With a growing population and infrastructure, money could now be made in conventional enterprises: banking, shipping, agriculture, construction, and manufacturing. The state's transformation from a remote frontier into a thriving economic hub had begun, and it was largely funded not by the gold itself, but by those who built businesses around it. Conclusion: the California gold rush produced plenty of glitter, but not always for those wielding the shovels. True wealth was more often found in commerce than in creeks. The real gold mine was not underground, but in the opportunity to serve, supply, and structure a booming new society. The gold rush built California, but its dark legacy still echoes today. Which other gritty chapters of American history should we explore? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this unfiltered look at the past, help us grow. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more from History Love.